At Sunday lunch, my daughter stood up, her hand trembling, voice slicing through the chatter. "Mom," she said coldly, "you are no longer one of us. Leave." The room fell silent. Forks paused mid-air. My grandson's laughter died in his throat. And in that moment, my world, 30 years of love, sacrifice, and motherhood, crumbled like glass underfoot. That betrayal lit a fire in me I never thought I had. Hi, everyone. My name is Ruth Hale. Before I begin, tell me, where are you watching from today? Because wherever you are, I want you to imagine this. Sitting at a table you built, surrounded by the people you raised, and hearing them tell you that you don't belong anymore. That was me, 3 months ago, on a Sunday that began like any other. It was supposed to be our tradition, Sunday lunch. My husband Paul started it when Julia, our only child, was just 6. Every week, no matter what, we gathered around the old oak table, passed around steaming dishes, and caught up on life. Even after Paul died, I kept that ritual alive. It was how I stayed connected to her, to him, to us. That day, I wore my blue floral dress, the one Julia always said made me look too hopeful. I even brought her favorite dessert, lemon drizzle cake, the same one I'd made on her 10th birthday. I remember thinking, maybe this time things will feel normal again. But there was something off the moment I arrived. The laughter stopped when I stepped through the door. Aaron, her husband, offered a polite smile that didn't reach his eyes. Their son, little Ben, ran to hug me, but Julia's voice cut through softly. "Ben, honey, wash your hands before you touch anything." I set down the cake, pretending not to notice. I've always believed silence can tell you more than words ever could, and that silence, it screamed. We sat. We served ourselves. The clinking of cutlery was the only sound between us. Julia didn't look at me once. I tried to start small talk. "How's work, sweetheart? I saw the new community project got approved." She interrupted. "We'll talk about that later." Aaron cleared his throat. "Actually, Julia, maybe we should talk about it now." I glanced between them, my heart tightening. Then Julia pushed her chair back, slowly, purposefully. Her eyes glistened, not with tears, but with something colder. "Mom," she said, voice low but firm, "we can't keep doing this. You've crossed too many lines." "Lines?" I repeated, confused. "Julia, what are you talking about?" Aaron leaned back, arms crossed. "She knows." I turned to him, but Julia's voice rose again. "You've been talking to my friends, to Aaron's mother, spreading stories, saying I'm not happy, that my marriage is falling apart. You even messaged Aaron behind my back, questioning his integrity." My mouth fell open. "Julia, that's not true. You only what?" she snapped. "Try to control everything? You've done it my whole life. Well, not anymore." I could feel every pair of eyes at the table on me. Aaron's parents, his sister, even little Ben, frozen mid-bite. I reached for Julia's hand. She pulled it away like I'd burned her. "Julia, please. You're misunderstanding." "No, Mom," her voice cracked. "I'm done. You are no longer one of us. Leave." The words hit harder than any slap. My vision blurred. I couldn't tell if it was anger, disbelief, or heartbreak clouding my eyes. I looked around that table, the same one where I'd taught Julia to say grace, where Paul once carved the Sunday roast, where laughter used to fill every corner. Now, not a soul spoke for me. Not one. And that's when something inside me changed. I stood up slowly, my chair scraping against the floor like a scream. I picked up my bag, looked Julia straight in the eye, and said, "Remember today, you didn't just lose a mother, you lost your future." Then I walked out. The air outside was cold, the kind that bites at your skin and clears your thoughts. I stood on their porch for a moment, staring at the neat little garden I'd helped Julia plant years ago. Every flower looked just as it had before, but I knew I would never see it the same way again. People think heartbreak comes with tears. Mine came with silence. And as I walked away, my heart broke, not just for the daughter who had banished me, but for the woman I'd become, one who had given everything, and somehow ended up with nothing. But that day, something else was born in me too, a quiet resolve. A whisper that said, "You are not done yet, Ruth." And that was the moment my story truly began. People think family breaks suddenly, like glass shattering all at once. But the truth is, it cracks slowly, quietly, one hairline fracture at a time. You don't see it until it's too late. Julia wasn't always this stranger who looked at me like an intruder. Once, she was my world, my reason to get out of bed, my partner in laughter and mess. When she was little, she'd follow me everywhere, into the kitchen where we'd hum old songs as we cooked, into the garden where she'd bury her tiny hands in the dirt, determined to help her father plant tomatoes. She was curious, stubborn, and beautiful in ways that frightened me, because I saw so much of myself in her. After Paul died, everything dimmed for a while. He had been the calm to our storm. I remember his funeral, the rain, the smell of lilies, and Julia clutching my hand so tight I thought she'd never let go. For a while, she didn't. We became inseparable in grief. We'd sit at that old table, just the two of us, sipping tea in silence. There were days we cried, others when we laughed, remembering his silly jokes. I thought the pain was knitting us even closer. But pain changes people. It changed her faster than I could keep up. She was 23 when she met Aaron. He was charming in that polished, almost too perfect way. The kind of man who compliments you just enough to win you over, but never quite enough to make you trust him. He worked in finance, always in crisp shirts and a watch that gleamed like it owned time itself. When Julia brought him home for the first time, I remember thinking, he smiles with his mouth, not his eyes. Paul would have noticed that too. Still, I tried. I made his favorite dishes when Julia told me. I laughed at his jokes even when they were condescending. I told myself, don't lose her over pride. But the small things started. He'd interrupt Julia mid-sentence, correct her in front of me. Once, she called to tell me she couldn't come for Sunday lunch because Aaron thought it was better to have time just as a couple. Another time, I found her avoiding eye contact, her tone brittle when she said, "Mom, you always have an opinion. Can you just trust me for once?" It hurt, but I told myself that was love growing up. You raise them to fly away, right? You just don't expect them to fly so far that they forget how to come home. I remember one evening vividly. It was late. Julia had called crying. "Mom, Aaron and I fought," she whispered. I could hear him yelling faintly in the background. I wanted to jump in my car, drive to her house, wrap her up like when she was 10 and scraped her knee. But she said, "Please don't. He'll be angry if he knows I told you." That sentence haunted me. He'll be angry. The next morning I texted her, "Are you okay? Do you want to talk?" No reply. Days later, Aaron called me instead. His tone was polite but sharp. "Ruth," he said, "Julia's sensitive. It's best if you let her handle things herself." He said it like he was protecting her, but I could feel the wall being built, brick by brick. After that, invitations slowed. My calls went unanswered for days. When I did see her, she was different, distant. Her laughter sounded practiced. Once, I gently mentioned my worries. "Sweetheart, I just want you to be happy." She smiled tightly and said, "Then let me be." I learned to stay quiet after that, to wait, to hope she'd come back on her own. Still, every Sunday, I cooked for two, just in case. Some nights, I'd look at Paul's old chair and whisper, "You'd know what to do." But silence was my only answer. And then came the small humiliation. Her birthday, 32. She didn't invite me. I found out through Facebook photos, her blowing out candles, Aaron's arm around her, the caption, "Family time." Family. Without me. I sat in my kitchen staring at that picture until the screen dimmed. For the first time, I realized love can be rewritten by someone else's narrative, and you're left outside watching it happen. Still, I couldn't hate her. She was my daughter. And that fragile hope, that foolish mother's hope, is what led me to that Sunday lunch. Because when she called that week and said, "Mom, let's have lunch," just like old times, I thought maybe, just maybe, she was ready to come home. I baked her favorite lemon cake. I pressed my dress, did my hair, and looked in the mirror, whispering, "Today will be better." If only I'd known what better really meant. The morning of that Sunday felt almost sacred. The kind of bright, forgiving day where you believe the world might give you one more chance. I woke early. The sunlight pooled across the kitchen counter as I sifted flour for Julia's lemon cake. It had always been her favorite tart, sweet, soft in the center. I even used her childhood bowl, the one with tiny cracks along the rim. "Old things hold stories," Paul used to say. "That's why they're worth keeping." Maybe that's why I kept holding on to Julia, to our rituals, to the idea that family could fix itself if you just kept showing up. By noon, I'd packed the cake carefully and changed into my blue floral dress. My hands trembled as I tied the ribbon on the box. Excitement or dread, I couldn't tell. All I knew was that when my daughter said, "Let's have lunch," I said yes before she could change her mind. The drive to her house was quiet. My heart thudded like a nervous guest knocking on a door that used to be hers. When Julia opened the door, her face softened for a brief second. Then that mask slipped back on, polite, practiced, unreadable. "Hi, Mom," she said. Her tone was warm enough to fool a stranger, but not a mother. Aaron appeared behind her, holding their son, Ben. "Ruth," he said with a smile that looked too rehearsed. "So good to see you." "Good to see you too, Aaron." My voice felt small, like it had to ask permission to exist. Inside, the house smelled of rosemary chicken and lemon polish. Everything in place, everything perfect, too perfect. The table was set, beautifully candles, white plates, folded napkins. I noticed there were more people than usual. Aaron's parents, his sister and her husband, no one from my side. Julia poured me a glass of water but didn't meet my eyes. "We thought it'd be nice to have everyone together again," she said. I nodded, pretending I didn't feel the distance in every gesture. Lunch began quietly. The clinking of cutlery was the only music. I complimented the food. "The chicken is lovely." "Thank you," Julia said flatly. Halfway through the meal, I felt Aaron's gaze on me, calm, calculated, waiting. Then he spoke. "So, Ruth," he said, resting his fork, "I hear you've been busy." My heart skipped. "Busy?" He smiled, the kind that doesn't reach the eyes. "Talking to people. About us." Julia's head dropped. The room grew heavy. I blinked. I don't know what you mean." Julia looked up then, her voice trembling but sharp. "Mom, please don't. Aaron showed me the messages. You told his mother you were worried about me, that he was controlling." I opened my mouth, words fumbling to form. "Sweetheart, I didn't mean—" She cut me off. "And you messaged him, Mom, directly, asking if he was treating me right. Do you know how humiliating that was for me?" I felt the color drain from my face. "Julia, I was just worried. You called crying one night." "Stop," she shouted, her chair scraping back. "You're always worried, always interfering. You think love means controlling everyone around you. I'm 32, Mom. You don't get to run my life anymore." Her voice cracked. The others looked away, their silence sealing my guilt before I could defend myself. Aaron leaned forward, almost sympathetically. "Ruth, we appreciate that you care, but Julia needs peace. She doesn't need pressure. That's what they called a mother's concern." My hands trembled in my lap. "I'm sorry," I whispered. "I just wanted to make sure she was happy." Julia laughed bitterly. "Happy? You've never trusted my happiness unless it came from you." That stung more than I expected. The room was utterly still. Even little Ben looked around, confused by the grown-up tension he couldn't understand. Finally, Julia stood. "I can't do this anymore," she turned to the others. "I need you all to hear this so it's clear." Then looking at me, her voice steady, cold, she said, "You are no longer one of us. Leave." Time stopped. I waited for someone, anyone, to speak up. Aaron's mother, his sister, even Julia's child. But they all stayed silent, like I was already gone. My throat burned. My pulse pounded in my ears. I tried to speak, but the words came out as a whisper. "Julia, you can't mean that." She didn't answer. I stood, every inch of me shaking. I looked at her, the daughter I'd raised alone, whose tears I'd kissed away, whose laughter once filled my home, and I didn't recognize her at all. "Remember today," I said quietly. "You didn't just lose a mother, you lost your future." And then I walked out. Outside, the sunlight hit my face like a lie. I stood there on the porch, hearing the muffled hum of voices inside, the clatter of plates being cleared, as if my exile were just another course in the meal. I got in my car and sat there, gripping the steering wheel. The lemon cake box sat untouched beside me. That's when the first tear came. Not for what she'd said, but for what I knew deep down. I had lost her long before she told me to leave. The first thing you notice after being cut off by your own child is the silence. Not just the kind that fills a room, the kind that fills you. That night, when I came home, the house felt too large, too clean, too still. My shoes clicked against the floor like echoes in a cave. I set down the untouched lemon cake on the counter. For a moment, I stared at it, that small, stupid symbol of hope, before I opened the bin and dropped it in whole. The sound it made, a dull thud, was louder than I expected. I stood there for a long time, listening to the hum of the refrigerator and the ticking clock above the stove. Every tick felt like a reminder that life was still moving just without me in it. I didn't sleep that night. My mind replayed the lunch over and over, each word sharper than the last. "You are no longer one of us." That line carved itself into my chest like a wound that refused to clot. By morning, my phone had lit up, but not with messages from Julia. Just from relatives who had heard something. Their texts were polite, but heavy with curiosity. "Are you okay?" What they meant was, "What did you do?" By the end of that week, even those stopped. The world carried on, and I became invisible. The silence spread into everything: my mornings, my meals, my sleep. I'd catch myself setting 2 cups of tea instead of 1. I'd glance at the phone every time it buzzed, praying it was her. It never was. Sometimes I'd scroll through old photos, Julia's graduation, our family trips, Paul holding her on his shoulders, both laughing at something I couldn't even remember anymore. I'd stare at those smiles and whisper, "Where did we go wrong, Paul?" But of course, the dead don't answer. Days turned into weeks. My routines blurred into one another. I watered the plants, folded laundry, cleaned spotless counters, anything to keep from thinking too much. Then, one evening, while cleaning the attic, I found a box I hadn't touched in years. Inside were Paul's letters, yellowed paper tied with string. My hands trembled as I untied them. He'd written them during his treatment, knowing he might not survive. The first line I read stopped me cold. "If you ever find yourself alone, Ruth, remember love doesn't vanish. It just changes shape. You'll find it again if you let yourself look." I sank to the floor, clutching that letter, and for the first time in weeks, I let myself cry. Not quiet tears, the kind that shake your body and steal your breath. Somewhere between the sobs, a strange clarity came. I realized how long I'd let my life revolve entirely around Julia, her happiness, her approval, her love. When she cut me out, she didn't just take herself. She took the center of my world. And maybe in a way, that was my fault too. I'd spent so many years being her mother that I'd forgotten how to be me. That night, I did something I hadn't done in decades. I opened my old journal. Its pages smelled faintly of dust and ink. I started writing not to her, but to myself. At first, it was just words. I feel empty. I feel lost. I don't know who I am without her. But as I wrote, something shifted. The words flowed easier. They started sounding less like grief and more like discovery. By the time I closed the journal, my chest felt lighter, not healed, but breathing again. The next morning, I made tea for one. It didn't taste as bitter. I took a walk through the park. Children were playing, their laughter floating through the air. One little girl ran past me, her curls bouncing, and for a split second, I saw Julia at 6, wild and bright and full of life. I smiled. It hurt, but it was a start. As the days passed, I began to notice things I'd forgotten to appreciate: the softness of sunrise through the curtains, the smell of rain on the pavement, the quiet hum of the world carrying on. It struck me then. Maybe silence wasn't punishment. Maybe it was space to rebuild what had been buried under years of being needed. I wasn't ready to forgive Julia yet, but I was ready to find myself. And that thought, small, fragile, and fierce, felt like the first breath of something new. I didn't know it then, but this silence, this aching stillness, was about to become the soil from which my next chapter would grow. Grief doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers, nudging you toward life again, one fragile step at a time. In the weeks after Julia's rejection, I began to move differently. At first, it was subtle. I stopped sitting at the dining table for meals. I'd eat by the kitchen window instead, where sunlight spilled through like forgiveness. I started leaving the TV off, letting silence breathe instead of choke. Then, one morning, I did something strange. I redecorated. Not because I wanted to erase memories, but because I wanted to remind myself that I was still here. I took down old curtains, painted the living room a soft sage green, and moved Paul's armchair near the window. "You'd like this," I told his photograph as if he could hear me. "You always said the room needed more light." Each brushstroke felt like reclaiming a piece of myself. A week later, I went to the library for the first time in years. I'd always loved the smell of books, paper, ink, and time. There, among the shelves, I met Lydia. She was around my age, with streaks of silver in her hair and a kindness that felt effortless. We started talking over the shared silence of turning pages. When I told her I used to teach literature, her eyes brightened. "You have a storyteller's voice," she said. "You should come to our writing group, Tuesdays at the community hall." I almost laughed. "Oh, I don't write anymore." She smiled knowingly. "Then maybe it's time you start again." That Tuesday, I showed up half expecting to feel out of place among strangers, but they welcomed me like I'd always belonged. We sat in a circle, reading poems, short stories, fragments of heartache and hope. When it was my turn, I read a piece from my journal, a reflection on silence, motherhood, and learning to breathe alone. My hands trembled as I read. When I finished, the room was quiet. Then Lydia reached across the table and said softly, "That was beautiful, Ruth. You should share it." "Share it?" "Post it online," she said. "People need words like yours." The idea terrified me. But that night, after pacing for an hour, I typed it out and posted it on a small community page. I titled it, "The Bridge We Burned." I didn't expect anything. But by morning, there were dozens of comments, strangers thanking me, saying my words felt like theirs. Some even shared their own stories of being cut off by family, of rebuilding from the ashes. For the first time in months, I felt seen. I started posting more. Essays about love, forgiveness, aging, about losing yourself in motherhood and finding yourself again in solitude. Each post was a thread pulling me back into the world. A few weeks later, Lydia messaged me, "Ruth, you're helping people. Don't stop." I didn't realize how far my words had traveled, not until the message came from Julia. It was short, sharp and cruel. Stop writing about me. You're embarrassing yourself. I don't want your pity stories all over the internet. Leave me out of your public therapy. I stared at the screen, my stomach twisting. For a moment, I wanted to delete everything, to crawl back into the quiet, but then something in me steadied. I typed back. Julia, none of my words mention you, but if they hurt, maybe it's because they touch something true. I hope one day you read them with love instead of anger. Then I put down my phone and made tea. That message from her, cold as it was, didn't break me. It did the opposite. It told me she was still reading, still listening, still tethered to me in some small, stubborn way. I smiled, a little sadly, and opened my journal again. This time I wrote a new piece titled, "The Door is Still Open." In it, I wrote about forgiveness not as surrender, but as strength. About how you can leave the door unlocked for someone, even if they never walk through it again. When I posted it, I ended with one line. Sometimes love isn't about waiting at the door, it's about keeping the light on, just in case. The post went viral, thousands of likes, hundreds of messages from people who'd felt the same ache. But the message that mattered most came 10 days later. It was nearly midnight. My phone buzzed. A name I hadn't seen on my screen in months. Julia. And next to it, just 2 words. Mom, please. When your child's name flashes on your phone after months of silence, your heart forgets how to beat. For a second, I thought I was dreaming. The house was quiet. The clock ticked faintly, and outside the rain whispered against the windows. Then the phone buzzed again. Julia. I hesitated. My fingers trembled above the screen before I finally answered. Julia? All I heard was breathing, then a sob. Mom. Her voice cracked open like a wound. I'm sorry, I didn't know where else to go. I sat down slowly, gripping the armrest. What's happened? It's Aaron. Her voice broke completely. He's gone. Gone. She gulped air between sobs. He left. Took the money, the car, everything. He said he needed freedom. I thought he loved me, Mom. I defended him against everyone, even you. For a moment, all I could do was listen to her weep. The same daughter who had once told me to leave her house now sounded like a little girl, again lost, terrified, heartbroken. I wanted to say I told you so. I wanted to remind her how cruelly she'd pushed me away, but the truth was simpler. She was my child, and she was hurting. Where are you now? I asked softly. At home. I can't breathe here. Everything feels poisoned. Can you... She hesitated. Can you come? The old me, the one from before the storm, would have rushed out the door without thinking. But this new version of me, the woman rebuilt from silence, paused. I'll come in the morning, I said finally. Try to rest tonight. You're safe. There was a long silence. Then in a whisper, Mom, thank you. After the call, I sat there for a long time, staring at the rain. The house no longer felt empty, just still, waiting. I thought of all the stories I'd written about forgiveness, never realizing that life was about to test whether I meant a single word of them. When I arrived the next morning, the house was eerily quiet. Julia opened the door. Her face was pale, her eyes swollen from crying. She looked smaller somehow, stripped of all her anger, her pride. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then she stepped aside and whispered, "Come in." The living room was a mess. Papers on the floor, a wine glass shattered near the fireplace. On the table sat an open envelope. I recognized the handwriting. It was Aaron's. I didn't mean to read it, but Julia pushed it toward me. "Go on," she said. "You should see what kind of man I defended." The letter was short, cruel, and cold. "Julia, I can't live in your shadow anymore. You and your mother are the same, controlling, dramatic, exhausting. I've met someone else. Don't contact me." At the bottom, his signature trailed off like a stain. Julia's voice shook. He said we were a team, Mom. He said you were the problem, that you'd poison me against him. And I believed him. She sank into the couch, covering her face. I ruined everything. I knelt beside her. No, I said gently. You believed in love. That's not ruin, that's hope. But sometimes hope blinds us to truth. She cried harder. I treated you like a stranger. I took her hand, the same hand I'd held when she was a baby. You can't change what's been done, Julia, but you can decide what comes next. She looked up, her eyes red. Do you hate me? I shook my head. No, I grieved you, but I never hated you. Then, as if the dam finally broke, she leaned forward and hugged me tight, desperate, trembling. I don't deserve your kindness. I closed my eyes. Then earn it, sweetheart. Don't waste this second chance. We stayed like that for a long time, the air thick with all the words we'd never said. In the days that followed, Julia stayed with me. She slept in her old room, quiet and cautious, as if afraid I'd vanish if she spoke too loudly. She cooked breakfast, washed dishes, tried to make small talk. And though my heart softened, it didn't forget. One evening, as we watched the sun dip behind the hills, she whispered, Mom, how did you forgive me? I thought for a moment before answering. Forgiveness isn't about erasing pain, Julia. It's about choosing not to pass it forward. She nodded slowly, tears glinting in her eyes. That night, as I lay awake, I realized something profound. I wasn't the same woman who'd been banished from that dining table. That woman had begged for belonging. This one had built her own peace. And now, as fate brought my daughter back to me broken but breathing, I understood that healing wasn't about winning. It was about staying open, even when it hurt. Still, deep inside, I knew this wasn't the end. Because love, especially between a mother and daughter, never ends cleanly. It always leaves something unfinished, something waiting for light. It had been 3 weeks since Julia's call. The house was alive again, not with laughter, not yet, but with movement. The kettle whistled in the mornings, soft music played in the background, and sometimes, when she thought I wasn't looking, Julia would hum to herself while making tea. But there was something else in the air, too, a fragile guilt, like dust that refused to settle. One Sunday morning, she came to my room holding an old photo album. Do you remember this day? She asked. The picture was from her 12th birthday, her arms around me, cake frosting on her nose, eyes bright with joy. Behind us, Paul was smiling, caught mid-laugh. I nodded, tracing the photo's edge. You made that cake yourself. Julia smiled faintly. You stayed up all night helping me frost it. I told everyone I did it alone. I chuckled. That's motherhood in a nutshell. But then her smile faded. I don't know how to make it up to you, Mom. I closed the album gently. You can't make it up. You can only move forward. She looked down, tears welling. I wish I could take back that day. The words I said, the way I looked at you. For a moment, the memory of that day came rushing back, her voice cold and cutting, the sound of chairs scraping, my heart cracking in real time. You are no longer one of us. Leave. It had taken everything in me to stay standing that day. And yet, as I looked at her now, small and sincere before me, I realized that pain no longer ruled me. It had shaped me. Julia, I said quietly, I do remember that day, and I want you to remember it too. Not with shame, but with awareness. That day, we both lost something, but maybe we needed to lose it to understand what love really means. She looked at me through tears. You still love me? I smiled. Always. But love isn't what it used to be. It's quieter now, stronger. It knows how to stand alone if it has to. She nodded slowly as if the weight of that truth finally made sense. A few days later, Julia asked if she could come with me to the writing group. When we entered the hall, Lydia greeted me with a warm hug. "And this must be Julia," she said kindly. "We've heard so much about you." Julia blushed, awkward but polite. During the session, we each shared something we'd written. When it was my turn, I read a short piece I'd written the night before, titled "Remember Today." It wasn't about blame or sorrow. It was about courage, the courage to rebuild after breaking, to stand up after being told to sit down. When I finished, the room was silent for a moment. Then Julia, voice trembling, said, "Can I read something too?" She pulled out a small notebook and began to read. I thought strength meant never needing anyone, but I learned that real strength is saying, "I'm sorry," and meaning it. My mother taught me that not with lectures, but with love that waited, even when it hurt to wait. Her voice broke. Mine did too. When she finished, there were quiet tears all around. Lydia reached for Julia's hand. "That was beautiful," she said. On the walk home, Julia slipped her arm through mine. "Thank you for not giving up on me." I looked at her and smiled softly. It wasn't about not giving up. It was about letting you find your way back. Spring came early that year. The garden, long neglected, began to bloom again: tulips, lavender, wild daisies. I spent my mornings there, pruning and watering, and sometimes Julia would join me. We didn't talk much. We didn't need to. Healing doesn't always happen in words. Sometimes it's in shared silence, in the rhythm of two people learning to breathe in the same space again. One morning, she brought me coffee and said quietly, "I've been offered a job in another city, just part-time, but it's a start." My heart tightened, pride and ache entwined. "That's wonderful." She bit her lip. "Would it be okay if I called you every week?" I laughed softly. "You don't need my permission for that, sweetheart." When she left a few days later, the house was quiet again, but this time it wasn't empty. It was peaceful. That evening, I sat by the window, watching the sky turn gold. I thought of that first Sunday at the table, the silence, the words that cut so deep. And then I thought of Julia's tearful voice saying, "Mom, please." The distance between those two moments, that was where healing lived. I whispered into the fading light, "Remember today, Ruth. You didn't just lose something, you grew into someone." Then I opened my journal and wrote the final line of my story. Forgiveness doesn't rebuild what was lost. It builds something new, something honest, something free. And as the sun sank beyond the hills, I smiled, not because everything was perfect, but because for the first time in years, everything was real. That betrayal had lit a fire in me I never thought I had. And now, it burned not with anger, but with peace.